Welcome, everyone. My name is Gina Izo, Manager of Concerts at the College of Performing Arts at the New School. We are so excited to have you here today on our Zoom event and for those of you who are joining us through Facebook Live. CoPA Conversations is a new series of curated talks presented by the College of Performing Arts. Conversations that take place between two artistic innovators drawn from our world-class faculty and selected guest artists touching on CoPA's values of socially engaged artistry, experimentation and technology, and improv and collaboration. The structure of today's event will be a conversation with our guests followed by a short Q&A. So if anyone has questions throughout, please feel free to drop them into the chat or into the Facebook Live chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can at the end of the hour. So I am excited to welcome our incredible guests, Jennifer Coe, who is one of our Manus faculty members, and Joel Ross, a faculty member of the School of Jazz and Contemporary Music. But before we begin, I want to just take a moment to tell you a little bit about them. So Jennifer Coe is a violinist dedicated to exploring a broad and eclectic repertoire while promoting equity and inclusivity in classical music. She has expanded the contemporary violin repertoire through a wide range of her commissioning projects and has premiered more than 100 works written for her. Some of her many projects include Alone Together, New American Concerto, Limitless, Bach and Beyond, Shared Madness, just to name a few. She has appeared with orchestras such as the New York Philharmonic, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and many more. She was named Musical America's 2016 Instrumentalist of the Year and has won numerous competitions and awards such as Concert Artists Guild and an Avery Fisher Career Grant. She is also the artistic director and founder of the nonprofit Arco Collaborative. Our second guest who we have with us here today is Chicago-born and Brooklyn-based vibraphonist and composer Joel Ross, who is emerging as one of today's leading vibraphonists of our era. I've had the privilege to hear both him and Jenny live in New York. They are both incredible. Joel, with his own bands and as a sideman, has toured nationally and internationally and has been presented at clubs such as the Village Vanguard, the Jazz Standard, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and festivals including the Umbria Jazz Festival, Newport Jazz Festival, SF Jazz, to name a few. In 2019, at age 23, he joined the Blue Note Records roster and added his name to their illustrious jazz vibraphonist legacy by releasing his debut album, Kingmaker, which has received critical acclaim. He's been reviewed by Pitchfork, NPR, and has topped the Downbeat Critics Poll Rising Star category for vibraphone and has become one of the youngest artists to receive a residency commission from the Jazz Gallery. So, without further ado, I welcome both Joel and Jenny today. You both have done so much in the world of collaborative art making, so we are excited to hear more about you and your work. So let's kick off today's conversation with a question, and I'll invite Joel on first today. Joel, do you want to start us off with telling us a little bit about your entry point into the world of music and how collaboration has been essential for your collaborative process?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. I started off playing music. It's interesting, especially the point about collaboration. I was born into this world already collaborating because I have a twin brother. And so we got into music kind of naturally. We grew up in a household where my parents weren't musicians, but they have always been serious music fans and interested in music. So music was always in the household. And we grew up going to church, and there was my godfather, he played the drums. And so we would always be kind of behind him watching him play the drums. And so we kind of naturally got into music that way. First started off playing drums, just beating on things around the house at 2 or 3. And just from there we grew up and, moved to different instruments and things, but still I always had my brother to collaborate with. So that idea of having somebody to play with has always been important to me because I'm so used to having somebody. And so, as we got into school, got into playing jazz, the collaboration that's necessary to create a form of high level music such as that, it's really important to me. I I always prefer playing with other people, and especially in jazz and improvised music and Black American music, it's the collaboration with the people you're playing with is so important to the music that you create. Who you're playing with and the relationship you have with them can it has so much to do with what will be played and what will be created. So I started off, to sum it up, I guess I started off being a collaborator and having my brother to collaborate with, which informed my whole thinking on collaborating in music.
That's incredible. Yeah, so having a brother that was in the arts, what were your parents also involved in the arts, and what did the sort of process into um, where you're at now look like for you? What was the pathway from growing up and having someone to play with, which is incredible uh, for your musical progress at that age?
My parents were never they weren't musicians. My brother and I are actually the I guess the only musicians in our immediate family. Um, but like I was saying, they were always avid music fans. I think at some point in our childhood, like my dad was the choir director at our church. They both sing, even maybe not professionally, but they have the ability to. But it's always just been avid music fans, and they immediately supported our interest in music. So we started off just playing in the church from when we were like, I don't know when they started letting us, maybe 4 or 5, up all the way until we were 10. That's when we first started playing. We joined our elementary school concert band. And that same year, we joined Chicago's, they have all city bands. We had a concert band, jazz band. We'd only been doing, up to that point, playing in church. But for school, we had just been doing concert band. And it was a percussion ensemble. Uh, so we were doing that. But that year, the 5th grade, when we were about, I think, 10 or 11, we auditioned for Chicago's All City Concert Band. Got in for that. By that time, when we started in the concert band, I'm the younger twin, so I always say he made me play the melody. We were both drummers, and I love the drums, but I will always admit he was always a better drummer and a better percussionist. So I started learning xylophone, glockenspiel, and started playing timpani, bass drum, all those things. We switched off. We had to have everything. I would say that I probably picked up a quick affinity for the melody. So when we auditioned for the jazz band, we both auditioned drums, but we had already got accepted to the concert band, and I was, I think, the principal male percussionist, I guess. So they suggested, well, why don't you play the vibraphone? And I was like, I don't want to do that. I was here for drums. I would do that. But the teacher, along with my dad, strongly suggested that I stick with the vibraphone, and so I did. I had to fall in love with the instrument, and I understand why. I feel like it's the instrument I will have the strongest relationship for the rest of my life with, because my two favorites are piano and drum, and they always will be. But I feel like the vibraphone is like the perfect meeting of those instruments. It is this keyboard percussion laid out in the form of a piano or a keyboard, but also the same, what they call it, strike it, same as the drum. So I think it came together as such where they supported us getting through that. I didn't want to play the vibraphone, but my dad knew, like, you're gonna play the vibes. That's gonna be what you do. He was right. I don't have to say what he
Do you think it was your interest in pitch that led you to the vibraphone, to stay with the vibraphone? Because it's both the vibraphone and the piano, right?
I would say so. It's also interesting that my brother, as a drummer, he has perfect pitch.
But you don't, I've never believed in perfect pitch though.
It's just like, he can identify the pitch. He knows what they are. So I guess as I was growing up, I didn't have it, and we've never ever felt like we were competing. But I just had the interest in the fact that he had perfect pitch and he could identify pitches and all that. And I didn't know what that was like. So I guess early on, it was important to me to just try to have a good understanding of pitch and theory and harmony. And I've always been interested in theory. So playing the vibraphone in the jazz aesthetic, I mean, just learning theory and harmony in general to apply it to any mallet instrument was and then applying that theory to the vibraphone is probably what holds me an interest the most. Because yeah, it's just early on. I know that I love theory, and I wanted to work on my ear. I just wanted to keep up with him in that regard. I guess it wasn't it was less competition and just more inspiration. Like I wanted to just be able to do these things, and I was interested in what it meant to have some sort of understanding and ability to understand and identify pitch and how I could use that, in my career.
Do you think a lot about like coloration? Because I've noticed, like when I've heard Tyshawn, right, he has such an uncanny ability to process pitch, right? But then I noticed, like, instinctively, when he's playing with other people, if somebody, like, for example, if a bass is playing, which is like low pitched, he'll be quite active, but he'll stay on cymbals, right? So it's out of the specific sound range. So do you feel like vibraphone do you have a different relationship to the top of the scale and the bottom of the scale?
I do. It's it's interesting. I'm really picky with the way that vibraphonists use the pedal, especially in the jazz world. I feel like it can be overutilized. I'm really picky with how long the notes ring out, especially in the higher range, because you can hear all the overtones and everything. And with comping, when they do four mallet comping, when you're comping to a company to support other musicians, I'm really picky with even just the number of notes. I don't like to comp with four mallets. I prefer to use 3 or 2 or not use vibraphone at all. It's an instrument in a higher range already, that when it comes to all the colors that might be in a typical jazz ensemble, with like a bass, piano, drums, and a horn, sax, or trumpet, for example, that those instruments already cover such a wide range of pitch. The bass is low, and they have the ability to get as high as they can on the instrument. I think the piano, when it's used, the piano or guitar, I mean, they also have such a wide range of pitch. I just find, and that's just personally for me, I find that the vibraphone isn't always necessary in that regard. And so when I'm playing with people and with groups and ensembles, I try to really pay attention to who's doing what where. If the piano is in the mid range, I might, if I do add anything, I might not play a chord. If the piano is already playing dense enough chords, I usually like to just play a note, playing it octaves, in a higher register. If the bass is rumbling low, or when the bass is in their higher register, then I might pluck a chord a little lower, not let that ring out too much. When improvising, playing faster lines, there's like half pedaling, not letting the notes ring out so much, because I'm really big on clarity as well. And so I feel like that's as close to working on a personal tone that a vibraphonist can get to, besides like what mallets you use. Just how you pedal is how long you hold your notes out. It's as close to I feel like I can get to approaching the way that I speak. How I can express myself as clearly as I'm trying to on the instrument. So it's less about pitch, I guess, and more like what is needed in the situation and how I can articulate that, I guess.
It's interesting. Because I teach a couple courses on Bach, and I'm always talking about how you voice chords, right? So it's not like every single pitch in the chord is important, and then there's also like implied harmony, right? So that it'll sound like you're in minor, and that starts in the beginning of the bar, but when you're on a string instrument, you can't evenly play like four notes, right? So it's how you imply it and which notes you hold over, which kind of sounds similar, because that's how you create kind of, I think, texture as well as making clear the harmony and the lines. So it's like vertical and horizontal in terms of pitch and also like counterpoint.
What goes into, I guess, the implied, what goes into showcasing the or putting an emphasis on the implied harmony versus already written,
But you have more notes, or you can strike more notes at once. Sometimes I have envy over that.
That's true. I find that I think that's a problem sometimes, having so much access to being able to put down notes. I always don't feel like that many notes are needed. It depends on the situation.
Yeah, I think it's about allowing oneself to be absolutely vulnerable, right? So you don't have to be complicated necessarily. It is about distillation, but it's also about courage. You know, like you don't have to just throw every single color in the world out at like the listener. That you can actually be still and be okay with sitting on something simply. I think in some ways that takes more courage than doing absolutely complex things.
I agree, and it's interesting. The thing about, when we were in high school and there was such an emphasis on people who had perfect pitch and their ability to identify things.
Oh my God, I totally don't believe in perfect pitch, and I will tell you why I don't believe in perfect pitch. Because perfect pitch implies that the Western scale is supposed to be applied to every single society and culture, which is not true. You have different scales in Indonesia. Personally, I'm born here, but I come from a Korean ethnicity, right? So there's different pitch scales in every single culture. So I always say perfect pitch does not exist. It's just really good relative pitch.
I agree. And so that's why I think, but yes, I agree with that. And that's why I think it's just possible to develop that relative pitch, um, which I say was probably my goal in that thinking. I find that when it comes to like the colors and what we do and what we play, when we were in high school, there was such an emphasis on being able to identify everything, pick out everything. Somebody plays something, I could hear that. So when it came to comping, which I'm glad you brought up Tyshawn, he's so skilled at not doing this. It's that it's the imitating, and it applies to any music. Imitating, you hear something and you play it back. It was something a lot of I think a lot of students are guilty of. They're able to hear it, so they play it back to the person. And it's like if you're talking to somebody, you're just repeating what they're saying instead of actually having a conversation. I think your point about Tyshawn going to the cymbals versus whatever the bass is doing is a good example of conversation. The bass is saying one thing in this range, and Tyshawn's responding in this range or with the cymbals. That's really the most important to me when it comes to using colors and how we shape conversation and the musical conversation.
I feel like I learned a lot from my teacher, Jamie Laredo, because he's not only is he one of the most generous human beings in the world, but he is also an incredibly generous musician. So he gives everybody space to be themselves while you're playing with him. And I feel like that's one of the greatest lessons I learned from him, right? Is to be able to let every single person be who they are. And I think that's what made him a great teacher too, also, because none of us sounded alike. And so we sounded so different, but he kind of gave guidance like, oh, maybe you're going too far off into left field in this section, right? But you figure out, how to tie this all together. Um, so, yeah, but I think that generosity and that giving of space, and I think it kind of applies to that sense of courage, like to trust that it's okay if you're not just playing constantly, you know, and you can actually listen and give other people the space and be curious about what they have to say.
It's like learning how to listen.
Yes, and that's the most important thing, I think, in the end, right? It's in some ways it's not only about playing your instrument. In fact, I think 99.9% is about how well you listen. Although it's a steep learning curve to learn the violin. So I'm usually very I still base a lot of things when I teach on technique. Just so, and that's only because it's such a steep learning curve that it's like you don't want technique to get in the way of expression, right? So you don't want a situation where just because you can't shift to a certain place means that you're going to be thinking about the shift instead of listening, right? So even teaching technique and being able to have technique is about getting to a place where you don't have to worry about yourself, but you can just focus completely on listening.
Really agree. I think it's like the importance of technique is obviously the ability to play the instrument, but I tell my friends, people I talk to, like I just want to have that technique to be able to express whatever it is that you feel like you constantly be working on that. So it's a never just continue to make sure that the technique is there so you can express yourself happily.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, Joel. You mentioned all these subtleties of your playing, your decisions of when and when not to use the expression pedal, and has become such an integral part of your vocabulary as an artist that you've developed and really distinguishes you when you're performing. And Jenny too. There are such I call them strong subtleties in sound, Jenny, that you have also developed along the way. And you had mentioned one of your teachers who'd played an integral role. And I'm curious just also about your entry point into music and who these mentors are for each of you that have kind of helped lead that path. Joel, for you, your brother is, you're kind of co-mentors with each other at that point. So at an early age. So yeah, Jenny, I'm interested in just hearing your entry points and
Yeah, so I mean, you're from Chicago. I do know that, Joel. But I am from, it was at the time when I was growing up. I don't know if you'll know this town. But at the time I was growing up, it was Glen Ellen, Illinois, which was essentially like a farm town when I was there. And, there was a change in U.S. immigration policy in 1965, which happened as a result of the Voting Rights Act, which happened as a result of people like John Lewis, right? And the sacrifices that they made. And also as a result of that, I think we have a lot of things happening politically because the makeup of what America looks like has changed. But in any case, this is a long way to get back to the fact that when I was living there, it was like our family were like aliens. Because I don't think there was another family of color for like maybe like until you hit Chicago. And so it was, what I would say is, first of all, I was lucky. So my parents grew up during the war and they were refugees, right? So they lost everything. My mom came from North Korea, and she was a child. I think she was like 7 to maybe 10 years old. And, people forget during war, you don't have school, right? So until she got to the refugee camp in Busan, she had lost like 3 or 4 years of school. So, I think she tried to give me everything she didn't have. So it was like ice skating, gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, There's got to be, oh, ballet, ice skating, and then violin. And I was really lucky because I had a really great first Suzuki teacher, Mrs. Davis, who I still stay in touch with. And she somehow believed in me. And then she told my parents that she felt that I had some kind of musical talent. And so she actually found my next teacher for me and took me to my next teacher. And I remembered she came to my lessons and she drove me because my parents, you know, they worked full time. So she actually drove me an hour every week, like back and forth to my lessons with the new teacher for the first year, and sat through the lessons. So I was incredibly grateful. Like I feel like with all of these different mentors, if it hadn't been for them, I would not be here. So it like started with Mrs. Davis, and then it moved to like Zarin Mehta, who was the only person that kind of advocated for me when I was young. And then he introduced me to like Isaac Stern, and then Isaac Stern introduced me to Jamie Laredo. Jamie Laredo introduced me, Zarin introduced me to Felix Gallimere, and then Felix brought me to Marlborough. So like, as a result, it's only because of the generosity and efforts of others that I am here. So I feel like that is an important thing to pass on because it's priceless. And I think it's a good reminder also as a teacher that you have the ability to make profound life changes for people. And that your actions have the ability to change the lives of other people. And it's just little bits of generosity, you know. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to make that effort, but the fact that they did absolutely changed the course of my life. You know? So I truly owe them, you know. But that's why I wanted to teach, because they gave me so much. You know?
Do you still, to this day, have your mentor, have a mentor, have mentoring?
I stay in touch with everybody. So I stay in touch with Mrs. Davis, my first violin teacher, who's now retired in a community in Arizona. And then with Jamie, I'm still closely in touch with. Felix passed away. Ed Aldwell passed away. But even, I got an English degree first from Oberlin. And so my English professor, she was head of women's studies. And then her partner, or her wife now, Eve, was head of political science there. So I feel like, I'm still in close contact with them as well. So I don't know. I feel like these mentors were incredibly kind and generous, and to be able to continue even learning about that act of generosity, which continues over decades, there's something really, to me, it's profoundly beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Mrs. Davis is a superhero.
She might be watching. One time she showed up at this, I should look at the participants. One time she showed up to one of the Zoom things that I was doing. And I was like, oh my God, hi, Mrs. Davis. Anyhow.
And we need more of her in the world these days. And no, it's just interesting hearing about your different paths and knowing that you've done so much with your art already. I guess maybe a great next question would be, from both of your individual paths here, how do you see or feel creativity and artistic expression, your storytelling, plays a role in your activism as artists and in today's current landscape? Because you each have so many different projects right now. I don't know who wants to start us off.
You should go, Joel. I just talked for a long time.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I guess I've never thought of or considered myself as an activist or being an activist, but I realized just as a person of color, as a black man in America, I, I think I see and realize that everything that I can do can matter. It does matter, and it makes a difference. I find that I'm in a position, I'm in a position to help, to do something, to bring awareness to anything that I can. So I mean, I first just like to start by thinking that I try to just live as an example of just as an example to show that stereotypes aren't real or that these things anything is possible with whatever I'm doing. I would want somebody else to see it, but just to think that it's possible. I try to live by example.
I mean, I think, right, like just by, in some ways, by just having presence in the world, that's the greatest act of defiance against white supremacy. Even the fact that, we even exist and that existence is not wanted, and we see that in many different forms. One of, yeah, I mean, yeah. So
I think you're right. I mean, that's the gist of that act. The gist of it for me, actually, it's just I just want to be and show that it's cool. Like that's all right. It is what it is, and I try to just it's like living by example. Bring awareness to things. I talk about my experience. I'm fortunate enough to not have so many negative experiences in my life, but I know people and I see things. I mean, we see everything that happens. We see everything that's happening now. It's like I really just try to first just present a hopeful attitude over everything. I don't let, I try not to let outside anything affect my inner peace. And I try to use my art to bring people a certain type of joy, or just any joy. I don't want to sound generic, but just like spreading positivity. It's like that's really what I want to do. It's really just beating stereotypes. That's my main.
In the realm of spreading positivity, with all things going on the past couple of months, artists have been kind of in this crazy place of creating and having a lot of things put a stop to creating. And I guess I'm wondering, how have each of you spent the past couple of months, and what have you, if been working on or concentrating on? How is everything with the pandemic affected your individual work? And how have you been handling it?
I don't, for me, I mean, the initial panic, of course, was, oh my God, I've lost all my work, right? And then I remembered, so I think the first thing, kind of like the last gig I had, I think I flew back to New York on like Monday or something. And then I was supposed to go out to Dallas, I think, to perform on Friday. And then they put that shelter in place was supposed to happen on Monday. And I remembered that I was supposed to fly out on Thursday. So Thursday night, by the time like that week, like every single day on the hour, like another gig was canceling. So of course, like in the very beginning, I was like panicked for myself. And then I was like, okay, you have to think about the end. Like always remember there will be an end point. And I was thinking, okay, so when I look back, what kind of person do I want to have been? Do I want to have only worried about myself? do I want to have been so scared that I'm just curled up in a little ball in like the corner of my apartment? Or do I want to help other people? And so for me, I think I woke up that Saturday and I came up with this idea of Alone Together. So, and then I remembered I went to kind of the managing director of my nonprofit, and of course everybody was freaking out. And so I think my being like, we have to do this project now. I've learned now how to better bring together consensus. But I was able to raise the money for that through the generosity of a lot of people, and we ended up commissioning, I think it was 20 younger musicians that were recommended by composers that I knew, and I went to the composers that I knew had academic positions or had salaries, and others that had institutional support of some kind. And so they donated their works, first of all, which was amazing. And then they recommended like a freelance artist that they knew could use the work, and they also believed in creatively. So I think I did that over the first 10 weeks of the pandemic. And now looking back, I realize that every single piece, because it was like everything was written pretty quickly, and it was like an emotional processing of that entire initial like shock to like grief to like, it was like going through all these stages of grief, and the pieces that were written document all of that. It also like documents, everything that's still going on, like loss of time, brain fog, rage, so all of these things. So that's why I think music is amazing. I think community is amazing. I think the most important thing to me is to, just as an artist in general, aside from the pandemic, is to bring stories that haven't been heard, and voices that haven't been heard, especially into classical music, because it has, unfortunately, a very long and racist history that is completely based on white supremacy, right? So I feel like the only way to change that and to allow the art form to grow is to really advocate for inclusivity, and also for equity. So that's where I put all of my efforts into, in terms of programming, in terms of who I commission. But that's been happening for years, and it's kind of more like a lifelong mission.
Do you feel like that was immediately like you knew this is what you had to do?
So I'm going to tell you guys the truth. So I completely freaked out, and nobody should institutionalize me. It was like a freak out time, So I remembered I totally freaked out. I was like, oh, maybe we should go to the grocery store. And then I went to the grocery store, and there was like nothing left on the shelves, but there were like 2 apples. So I brought the 2 apples home, and then I totally freaked out. I was like, oh my God, but what if the coronavirus is on the apples? So I soaked the apples in Lysol for 30 minutes, and then I ate them. And then I was like, this really tastes like Lysol. I was like, oh my God, I'm insane. And I was like, I have to go to sleep because I'm completely insane. And then I woke up the next morning with this idea. So I don't recommend people poisoning themselves with Lysol, but I think it just had to do with like, I think everybody felt incredibly panicked in the very beginning. Scary. It was super scary, especially in New York. Oh my God. Like those weeks when like the ambulances, just multiple ambulances, like nonstop. Oof.
Yeah, it is. It was quite an intense moment. And maybe just after we hear from what Joel's been doing, your Lysol apple has led me into a question of wellness.
Oh my God, I realize I sound like our president, and now I want to like.
But Joel, yeah, what have you've had albums released, and what have you been working on right now? What's your creative process like in this moment?
Um, I guess in line with what I was saying about, I guess keeping positive. Unfortunately, I've been able to. I mean, I'm blessed. Like I haven't really had to worry about money or anything. And so I've just been able to still focus on creating all these opportunities online, doing live streams, and a couple of commissions and things. So I mean, music keeps me sane. So it's just like my creative process never stops. I have when I have to compose, I have to compose, I have to write. So at the start of everything, it's funny. I kind of never had time for anything because I was kind of traveling a lot. I had to leave school because I was just traveling. I had to make a choice between school and working to like pay my bills and things. So I made that choice and things were going very well and successful. But once the pandemic started, it was like, all right, well now you're home for the foreseeable future. So trying not to dwell on the negativity of the entire situation, along with like the hatred and vitriol just spreading through the nation. Uh, I just tried to focus on continuing to write, continuing to practice, and just get things done that I hadn't had time to get done. Just like do the taxes. I mean, but like really basic things like incorporating, like a business or getting bank accounts together, or just I don't know, these mundane things that people might think are mundane, but just I hadn't had time to do. I'm going back to school to finish, like I'm trying to make the best use of this time. But also, I got a lot of opportunities, fortunately, to continue to write, to compose, and then some performance opportunities in the last month or so. And it's been really important to me to make sure I share that, just share the opportunities with everybody I can, all my peers, all my friends. Try to make sure everybody gets paid. Everybody gets an opportunity to do something. Just trying to like share the love. So that's been my focus has been to just like get myself together and just continue to support everybody that I can, however I
I feel like the generosity, I've seen like acts of generosity that are kind of astounding to me. And this pandemic has created situations where I've had this beautiful opportunity to see that side in people, and that's been one of the most some of the most moving things for me. And that kind of, yeah, so I feel like that's the beautiful thing that's happened during this time.
can. That's just another form of collaboration, really, in music. I mean, we not just music, but in all the arts. I'd say the arts are what can, are holding a lot of people together. A lot of people just depend on music alone just to put them in a better state of mind. Just like trying to keep music alive. I mean, just performing out. I mean, we didn't know when we'd be able to tour or do gigs anymore. So I remember when everything first started, just everybody was online. They just had to play. And I like that. I had some reservations about it.
The reservations are that musicians should be paid for their work because it is work. And I think it was a great act of generosity for musicians to offer all of their work for free, right? But the problem that's happening as this pandemic continues is that I know that my side of the business is just suffering to no end. And there's not really a light at the end of the tunnel yet. So I think that it is an important time to really reflect upon arts institutions and to keep in mind that arts institutions are based on art and for and art is created by artists. So if there's not a situation where the community helps each other, I think there's going to be a lot of damage to artists and to musicians. But ultimately, in the end, artists are going to survive, right? And so it really does have to be a communal. And what I mean by artists will survive is that some institutions might not survive. So there should be good treatment of each other, because artists will also help those institutions if those institutions have also been good to artists. That's all I'm saying.
I agree.
We have a number of, students returning to the College of Performing Arts in the fall, and I guess I'm curious for students who also are asking themselves the same questions of what should I be doing during this time, where should I be looking, what is the potential light at the end of the tunnel. I guess I'd be interested in knowing what kind of advice you would give to those students who are, for the first time potentially entering into school, or going to be in this new online world of learning with other students. What would you say to them right now, knowing that they're asking themselves these same kinds of questions with what our field looks like as a whole?
I think artists always speak truth, and that this is a time also where artists can lead, which means that we work really well within constraints. Like, we never have enough money to do stuff, like to make things and like produce stuff. Like, there's never enough money. So I do think that this is an opportunity to think incredibly creatively, and I think the more that we invest in that creativity and thinking outside of the box, which artists are really good at, the more we're going to develop as an art form. So what I would say to students is that instead of only thinking about what one loses, it's actually an opportunity to think about what you can gain. Because, for example, the ability to, for example, bring in more guest artists or guest speakers, right? You used to have to pay for plane fare and hotel, but now we have the ability to invite, world-renowned musicians into Zoom, and they can actually engage with them directly. This is the class I'm trying to promote in the curriculum for the fall semester. We'll see what happens. But on to you, Joel.
I guess what I'll tell students, it's something I remember, like when everything got started and the pandemic and everybody had the quarantine. It's just like making the best use of our time, making sure you practice, you do everything, you keep pushing everything. But I would say also take time to like decompress and step away. Since we've been home, I feel like everybody's been in their screens, been online all day, every day. And I think it's important to just find a way to make sure you just give yourself some time to not like find a hobby or anything. Music is my hobby, but just allow yourself, just don't be too first off, don't be too just bogged down by the news and everything that we see. I mean, stay abreast to everything, but like, don't be so not affected, but like, just stay current, but like, just give yourself some space. Take a break, please. Practice and take a break. You don't have to. I also like people aren't practicing for gigs anymore. Like, we'd be practicing like, all right, I have to get this together for this concert, but now you don't have that. So just figuring out what you're practicing for, why you're practicing, just thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, finding that joy, or just reasoning to continue. Just making sure you don't know, have purpose. But it's not like you don't have anything to prove to anybody. Just try to take care of yourself. I think in general.
Aside from your taxes and working on your art, then are there things that you've done during this time to kind of step away from one, your computer screen, but two, to just give yourself a break during this time?
I mean, well, just museums have been closed. That's what I usually just love to go to museums, but just going for walks, walking through parks and everything, just socially distancing, having my mask on, and everything. Just getting outside in general. I'm okay with just sitting on a balcony, just looking at the sky or whatever. Trying to get literally outside, get some fresh air, go on a walk, do anything, do a physical activity if you can. So I've just been like going outside, trying to visit all these places, walk around New York, see parks and things that I haven't had time to do.
And Jenny, how about you? Are there things that you've done to kind of step back?
Well, I tried to think, because this is such a time of contraction, right? We're not traveling. We don't meet large groups of people. We don't necessarily meet new people. It's about sustaining maybe the relationships that we do have. So I tried to think about how can I expand during this period of time. And it's not necessarily going to be socially, right? Because we can't gather in large groups and stuff. So then I just thought, okay, so what can I do and learn that I would never do? So I learned like Final Cut Pro. It was like, well, I would have never, ever done this had it not been for the pandemic. And yeah, and bicycling. I don't know. Those are like slightly strange things to say, I guess. But those are because I would have never biked before. That would just, I mean, I biked as a student, and then I got hit by cars. So like once I got to New York, I was like, I'm never biking again. But then there's like the Hudson Greenway, and I was like, oh, that's nice. Okay, I'll do that.
And you're in Brooklyn or in Manhattan?
Me? I'm in Manhattan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So biking is a whole thing in itself.
Well, so I'm super uptown, and so on the west side you have the Hudson Greenway, which is really nice. I am never going to drive in like a place with cars on it again. Yeah. But it's been fun.
And so what are each of you most excited about coming up for yourselves in the future? Music related or not music related?
Oh my God.
What's the light at the end of the tunnel at this point for you all?
Can I hug people? I mean, that would be nice. Instead of having socially distant like dinners and cocktails, if I could actually hug my friends, that would be awesome.
I've got an album coming out this fall that I've been getting ready for during this time, just preparing and everything. I'm looking forward to that. It's been nice getting back to performing with people amidst the circumstances, but I've been able just to see my friends. It would be nice to actually hang and get close, but I'm just appreciative just to be able to do what I've been able to do. So it's been nice to play. I'm looking forward to playing more again, whenever that may be, and releasing this music. Yeah.
What is the upcoming album?
It's called Who Are You? And it's my next album on Blue Note. The same group with a few guest artists and such. More shall be announced in the coming weeks.
I should have, my record company's going to kill me. New album coming out in November. It's called Black and Beyond. Okay,
And
got that
Jenny,
out of the way.
for those who may not be familiar with that project, do you want to just tell a little bit about? So you each have all these things going on, and you're releasing albums. Look at you both go.
Yeah, so I've released all 6 natas and partitas of Bach. This is the last of the series, and I commissioned a bunch of works, kind of companion pieces, and I've also recorded, I guess, newer pieces, but they're not that new. Like Barrio was like last century, Bartok was last century, but yeah. So that's finally the completion, and I was supposed to do. I was staging all 6 natas and partitas of Bach. We were supposed to do our soft open this summer with Bob Wilson and Lucinda Childs, but that got delayed. But the record's coming out.
Well, congrats. These are no small undertakings, especially during a really, really crazy moment. But that's really exciting for both of you. One last question for each of you. And for anyone who is joining us, if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop them into the chat at this moment. But I will leave with one question here, is what has most surprised you about your career at this point? From where you both started to where you are now.
I don't know. I never thought I could make a career in music. So, I mean, yeah. I don't know if I can answer that. Joel.
I guess I never thought that I couldn't, because it was.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's just that, like, not that I couldn't, but just like I always knew, like, music. It was what I wanted to do. So it's just, I guess, what has surprised me most is seeing playing the vibraphone itself, and maybe it's just so surprising because I was so reluctant to do it. It's just like seeing where the vibraphone is what I've been able to do. Be able to do. It's been nice.
Absolutely. So we don't have any questions, but I will say there are some very nice comments here. We had one participant say, not a question, but thank you to the new school and for this presentation. I've listened to Joel play for years. It's wonderful to hear this conversation between these two musicians. And another comment that said, thank you, this is beautiful in a really rough time. So some really wonderful comments, and it's been really great just catching up with each of you and seeing how you've been and where you're at. So I just want to also say thank you to everyone for joining us, everyone who tuned in via Facebook Live, and for those of you who are here with us on the Zoom. If at any point you would like to revisit this conversation, you can do so at coparemote.com. And a huge thank you to Joel and Jenny for sharing your work and your processes with us. And it has been just really wonderful getting to spend this time with you. So I encourage everyone to continue to check out their work. Stay tuned for their upcoming albums. They are two artists that continue to create at all moments in time. So please stay tuned for their work. And thank you again. It has been just really wonderful to hear from both of you. So, and we look forward to seeing you both back at the new school when that time comes. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye.